Okay, I'm Betty Osceola. I'm a member of the Miccosukee tribe of Indians and of the Panther clan. We're out here on one of the tree islands in tribal lands. We call this particular island Tear Island.
Betty, can you tell us a little bit about the history of water quality and what it means to the indigenous First Peoples of Florida?
You know, I think to understand why it's very important to our people, we have to get in a little bit in where the Miccosukee people came from. You know, we survived off the lands here in Florida. We hunt, we fish. Tree islands like this particular one, we might plant crops, our corn, our pumpkin. Our families lived on neighboring islands. We traversed the Everglades in periods of high water in our dugout canoes, and when the water got lower, you know, by foot. And life was beautiful out here. There was an abundance of plant life, animal life, and the people prospered out here in their health and in their way of life, and their traditions were very deep, and their language was very strong. And over time, as more people came into this land that's now called Florida, after the Spanish, after the Europeans came over, the land started getting more of these other races of people, and eventually land was getting developed, and our people started seeing cars, and the river of grass, the Everglades, that was a flowing river. Now we started seeing roads being built and canals being built, and our people who used to travel all the water routes, the natural channels, to canoe their canoes across the state, to follow the game where game was plentiful in the seasons, and also to be able to plant in the different seasons. The places that we used to hunt, or our seasonal homes where we used to be able to go to higher ground and plant crops or look for the fruits, other people were residing in those areas. So we started seeing our ability to roam freely all across this state dwindle. And the Everglades and the environment of Florida, that was our virtual grocery store, was getting smaller. And then over time, we started noticing planting on the tree islands in the different areas. Our plants what we planted wasn't flourishing as much, wasn't producing as much. The soil was changing. And with the water flowing, you know, the people started learning about that there were, because of the different developments, and starting to see areas that were once Everglades turned into farmland. Once Everglades were turned into cattle ranches, the elders started seeing that change in the environment. And they started seeing that change, that even the abundance of wildlife was changing. And in the 1950s, there were and 40s, there was a period of time where it was dangerous to be a Miccosukee or a Seminole. And we always heard stories about, you know, especially near the roads, how it was not uncommon for someone to shoot into the camps. And you got to remember, before there were roads, we were all isolated from the outside civilizations. So when we became unisolated, and when we couldn't travel the Everglades by the dugout canoes like we could, a lot of people started moving closer to the roads, and that put themselves in danger. And you know, it's very sad to hear stories how your mom tells you how, yeah, when she was a little girl, they were always taught when they heard a car coming to run into the woods and hide. And even I was taught that, you know, even in the late 60s and 70s, even I had that fear that someone's going to shoot up into our camp. So I was taught how to go run and hide.
So racism has played a very serious role in the lives of indigenous people in Florida.
Yes.
So do you feel that when it comes to environmental justice, is there a serious component to the amount of let's just say particulates or poisons allowed in the water table. Is is that is there something to be said about racism and environmental justice here in Florida?
Yes, and getting to the importance of water quality for our people, in the 70s, we were informed that there were too much mercury, too much chemicals in the water, and not to hunt and fish or drink the water more than once a week. So you go from a people that lived off the land to having to find other ways to provide food for their family. So that comes into the social justice issues. You have a people who lived a certain way of life for so many generations now having to change, not because they polluted the environment, but because someone else did. But we had to adapt to survive. And so as our tribe started interacting more with the non-Indians, and started realizing that we need to formally organize to become a tribe to protect our people and our way of life and our right to exist in the Everglades, and protecting ourselves, in turn protecting the environment of the Everglades. And once after the tribe got their federal recognition, they started working on how to protect, because the way to protect who we are is to protect the water quality, because we see a land loss, we see loss of being able to plant our crops, loss of animals, and these are the things that we needed to be who we are. And also the health of the tree islands, to be able to use some of these islands, they're homes to us. Just like this here, this island we're on was the ancestral home of the late William Buffalo Tiger, who was the very first elected chairman of our people. And also some of these islands, we still try to use them today to plant our crops. And so to protect the people, we had to protect the environment. And that's why water quality and protecting the ecosystem here in Florida is very important to us, because we are the environment. That's how we see ourselves. We are a part of this environment. And protecting water quality in the environment, we're protecting ourselves. In our tribe, over time, it took them many years to develop water quality standards that were approved by EPA and adopted. So the tribe was able to set water quality standards over their tribal lands. And in order to reduce the pollution coming into their tribal lands, they ended up suing the state and the federal government over it. Because even though outside communities didn't want that polluted water going to their communities, Florida had no issue sending all that polluted water into the Everglades for the Everglades to clean it. But the Everglades here, south of Lake Okeechobee, is the home of the Miccosukee. And even today, in 2019, the state still allows a lot of that pollution to come into tribal lands. And even though we have our water quality standards, and we sued the state that they're supposed to work towards reducing that pollution into tribal lands, they have made some improvement, but they haven't done what they said that they would do in a settlement agreement with this tribe. And not too long ago, they were trying to get out of the settlement agreement and their promise to the Miccosukee tribe to clean up the water that they're sending to the tribe. And one of the injustices that is happening now is that because Everglades National Park is south of tribal lands, the state and the park have no issue with using tribal lands to filter the water so that the national park can get their clean water. And for months at a time, the tribal lands are submerged underwater so that it can sit north of the park and do what it needs to do, so that by the time they release it into the L29, which is the canal that's adjacent to the Tamiami Trail, so it goes clean into the park. So they're using tribal lands as a de facto stormwater treatment area to filter their pollution. And the tribe keeps pointing out that before the water ever hits tribal lands, it's supposed to be clean. And so that's a big social injustice to the Miccosukee people. And before Hurricane Irma, water was already over the top of this island that we're on. And you can see the watermarks here on the trees of the legs of here, up here. I could drive my airboat and drive around all up in here. and water was over this island for many months, about 6 months. So not only were they flooding the homes of the Miccosukee here in our lands, they were flooding homes of the alligator, the turtle, the snakes, because those wildlife didn't have any land to be able to come onto to look for food, to have their babies. So not only were they hurting the Miccosukee people, they were hurting the wildlife of the Everglades, and also killing the tree islands, because when the islands is underwater for more than 30 days, they start to lose their landmass, they start to erode, and trees start to die, and islands over too many times, they can't come back from that, and they start to disappear. So that's to have the health of the Everglades, you need to have the health of the environment. So everything that exists in the Everglades needs to survive, and that's why water quality is very important to the Miccosukee people. And we keep looking at ways to get the state and the federal government to honor their agreements to the indigenous people, not just here in Florida, but everywhere.
What is your greatest concern right now?
Well, one of the concerns, there are many. One of our concerns is that there's an effort here in Florida, because some of the communities north of us don't want the polluted water, the water that's coming out of Lake Okeechobee. So they're trying to funnel more water into the Everglades, the home of my people. Because other communities don't want that polluted water, their solution is to send more water south, and they say onto Florida Bay, because Florida Bay does need fresh water, but they need clean fresh water. And with the bill, and they want to build the EAA reservoir, and even the studies for that reservoir, which is a concern, is that it's going to put more polluted water into the Everglades.
So this really is, without being dramatic, not just environmental injustice, but it could mean the end of the Miccosukee people if they were to send that poisonous water south. Is there anything that we can do to protect and defend our sacred First Peoples?
Well, I think a lot of these projects that get done, you have to realize that whenever a project is done, there's an injustice done to someone else. To cure a problem for one community, you create a problem for another community. And here for the Miccosukees, we need to be at the table. Yes, you have a lot of communities in Florida who lobbied for different projects and went to the Tallahassee legislature, lobbied Congress, but they always forget that they have the indigenous people within this state. And there's this mentality that they can think for us, instead of including us in the conversation and listening to us. When we try to tell them what they're doing is going to create a bigger problem. And when we try to tell them what they're doing is going to impact our tribe. And there are times, and I have read on Facebook, and people have made some publications of how the Miccosukees are getting preferential treatment. We sued to protect our water quality. It's not that the state prefers, or the federal government prefers to give us preferential treatment, but apparently only because we're only 600 people, and there are communities that cannot understand why our water is so important, when they who number in the thousands should be more important. And we need to realize, to be good neighbors to indigenous people, is you have to remember our lives are just important as yours. We're equal in value in our life. And when people start making these arbitrary decisions or comments about, they're just Indians, or they're saying, oh, well, we don't want the polluted water, so we just got to do these projects to send it to the Indians, you're helping continue that pattern of genocide on indigenous people. You need to stop the genocide. And you need to realize that when you send polluted water to an indigenous people, you're trying to slowly kill those people. And nobody should be advocating to poison anybody else or to kill anybody else in that manner. And we have a right to our way of life, just like anyone else has their right to their way of life, and it needs to be respected. Just because this island with these chicky structures, you don't consider it a home, I do. I live in a camp very similar to this, in a chicky hut, and this is my home. Just because your home looks different with its four walls doesn't mean my home doesn't have as much right and to be protected, just as you want to protect your home. So we need to be a good neighbor, and we need to figure out how we can all move forward together. And then when it comes to the water issues in Florida, we all need to get behind the movement of keeping those chemicals out of the water. Stringent the regulation now doesn't have any teeth. You need to have regulations that prevents all those harmful chemicals in the quantities that are not acceptable for human health.
Well, it sounds to me that what you've done as a First People is to stand firm in your space and say, we will not tolerate low standards of water quality. So by honoring what you have demanded, everybody benefits. There's no downside to this.
Yeah, everybody will benefit. And the reason the state, our tribe set those standards was to force our neighbors to improve their standards. But our neighbors keep trying to look for a way to go around and violate our standards, instead of saying, you know what, if the Miccosukee care enough about their health, then we also need to care about our health. We're trying to make other communities care about their health in a way that they fix their standards, so they're not polluting their waters and sending because their children deserve a right to a clean environment, healthy environment as well. We're trying to get them to wake up and realize that their communities also deserve the right to exist. And it's very hard to wake them up when they just want to send the problem elsewhere and not clean up the water and continue to make improvements so that you can have a healthier ecosystem. That's very hard to get into conversation, because now they want to put polluted water down a hole as a solution, without realizing that it's going to travel all under those underground channels and caverns and come up somewhere else and continue to perpetuate their problem. And that's not the solution. They don't realize that, Lake Okeechobee is a lake. It needs to, if it functions as a lake, to give it opportunity to survive. They don't realize that you can't just send massive amounts of water into the Everglades and you're going to continue to kill it. They need to listen that and learn you're dealing with just like we are living beings, that the Everglades itself and our environment here in Florida are living beings, and really understand, if somebody comes with a project and a solution, question what are the outcomes.
Yeah, and not in my backyard is not a solution.
It's not.
Betty, can you please, is there anything that you can think of specifically that for all those who care enough to listen to this video, what would you like us all to do right now?
I think you need, right now, my hope is, I keep trying to get people to educate themselves about what is really going on here in Florida, not just with the indigenous people, but right now you have your issues of, hepatitis. I think you got a state of emergency for hepatitis. What is the cause? I think it's because you got all this sewage overflow going into the environment, all this sludge being dumped, and pay attention to everything that's going on. Not just in your backyard, but other people's backyard, because some people are sending their problem, and some of that sewage sludge is coming from one county and being trucked across the state to somebody else's backyard that probably doesn't even know that's going on. And you gotta and also, we can gripe about it, but until we get these laws changed to be more protective of everyone in this state, we can keep holding signs and keep trying to stop projects, but we need to close those doors that allow those type of harmful activities to cease. And that's very hard for people to be aware of all the legislation that occurs. By the time a project comes out for public review, by the time a legal legislation change comes out for review, private interest has already been in the door and drafted the changes. So we have to figure out how to keep those private interests out the door and have legislation drawn that represents everyone's interest, because there's too many loopholes that allow these different things to happen. And there's something that's going on that is very concerning for the Miccosukee people now, and it's called Western Everglades Restoration Project. In the Western Everglades Restoration Project, the modeling of the water and how to route more water into the Big Cypress Preserve on the western portion of the Everglades, that modeling doesn't take into account additional water that will have to be routed through that system, because there's future development plan for the northwestern area outside of this project's footprint. So you have modeling that would put about, I think they say about 18 more inches of water above what already comes into the Big Cypress National Preserve. And it's not going to be that much, that water's not going to be that much cleaner. I know they're planning for STAs, but to clean that water and bring it into the Big Cypress National Preserve. But one of the things that we found out in the agencies that are planning in modeling this Western Everglades project, they themselves did not tell the tribe. The tribe found out in another manner that they're looking at condemnation of properties within the preserve, and the tribe has tribal members and also descendants of their tribe who have properties in the preserve, and then is in that footpath of condemnation that they're, because they can't protect for flooding of those properties.
So that sounds a little bit like a sneaky kind of eminent domaining or land grab under the guise of, well, we're trying to clean the water, but we're really not.
You know, the concern for us, we are looking at, okay, they're trying to take us out of our homeland, because a lot of times when indigenous people reside in an area, whether it's reservation land or their ancestral lands, and that's considered Indian territory or Indian lands, we're always in the way of something. And we feel that they want to remove the indigenous people out of the Big Cypress Preserve for whatever their ultimate future goals are. When the preserve was created, our people existed there before there was ever the preserve. And it was created with the understanding that we were not just our homes, but our access rights and to protect our traditional uses of the Big Cypress Preserve were guaranteed in that congressional legislation. So we feel that through the vehicle of work, that they're trying to circumvent that congressional legislation that protects our right, the Miccosukee, to be in the preserve and exist in the preserve and utilize the preserve as we historically did. So they're trying to divest us of those rights. So we need people to contact the state, because water management is involved, because that's the vehicle that they're going to use for condemnation, because water management would have to do the eminent domain. The Department of Interior is involved, because that's where you have the National Park Service. The preserve is a part of the Park Service system, even though it's a preserve. So people need to understand that, you know, how many years and how many generations is it going to be okay to remove Indian people off their land? How many generations is it going to be okay to continue the genocide of a people and of a culture? We're also looking at this as, this is another form of them to assimilate an indigenous people with whatever culture they think we need to assimilate with. Because if you remove us out of the preserve and out of our homelands, where else are we going to live besides in an urban area where we can't practice our culture and our tradition and farm and interact and be who we were meant to be here in the environment? So that's another form of forced assimilation as well.
These are heavily complicated topics, but you've broken them down so clearly and so beautifully. It's It's poetry. Thank you very much for constantly fighting for your rights. It is an inspiration and it's empowering to everyone who feels that there is right and there is wrong, and this is wrong what they're doing. And it's not wrong just for our sacred First Peoples, but it's wrong for everybody. The buck has to stop.
It has to stop somewhere, and we have to heal. We have to all heal together and live together, and quit looking at each other as something to gain from in a negative way. Something as that, oh, we want that area, so we need to divest these people from it, whether they're indigenous or any other community, because it's happening more so for other communities as well, not just the indigenous people. When is enough going to be enough? And we're going to be human beings. I say I'm a natural being in a natural world, but most other people call themselves human beings. When are we going to realize that we are part of the natural world, and we were all meant to be here for whatever reason, and realize and accept that we need to coexist and we need to love each other? I remember the late Buffalo Tiger, whenever we would have our meetings with our people, he would always periodically say it. Everyone needs to just love each other, love one another, and the world will be a better place. He always said that. So that's my question. When are we all going to just love each other and make the world a better place?